I was a park ranger for 20 years. I'm writing this because I finally broke the one rule that matters. Never leave the park. Welcome to the Wilderness Protocol. There are protocols for everything in the National Park Service. How to handle a charging bear, how to forecast a wildfire, how to rescue a stranded hiker. They are written in thick, reassuring manuals, bound in government-issue gray. They are designed to keep us safe, to keep the public safe, to maintain the delicate boundary between the civilized world and the untamed wild. But in the park where I served, a remote, forgotten place we called the Preserve, there was another protocol. An unwritten one. A single, simple, and absolute rule passed down from one generation of rangers to the next. It was not a rule for the tourists. It was a rule for us. And it was the only one that truly mattered. My name is Samuel. I was a park ranger for 20 years. I dedicated my life to that place. I thought it was my job to protect the park from the world. I was wrong. My job was to protect the world from what is outside the park. I'm writing this now from a place where there are no trees, no mountains, no sky. I'm writing this because after 20 years of perfect unwavering service, I finally broke the one rule that matters. Never leave the park. The park isn't on any public map. Officially, it doesn't exist. It's a vast million-acre expanse of pristine, untouched wilderness in the most remote corner of Idaho, designated on internal documents only as Preservation Unit 734. We, the handful of rangers who lived and worked there, just called it the Preserve. I was assigned there as a rookie, a fresh-faced 22-year-old full of romantic notions about the wilderness. I thought it was just a normal park, albeit a remote one. My commanding officer at the time, a grizzled, taciturn man named Alistair, was the one who explained the truth to me on my first day. We were standing at the main gate. It wasn't a friendly, welcoming wooden sign like at Yellowstone or Yosemite. It was a 20-foot-high, electrified, chain-link fence with a single, heavy steel gate. It looked less like the entrance to a national park and more like the entrance to a maximum security prison. You need to understand something, son, Alistair had said, his voice a low rumble. This fence isn't to keep the animals in. It's to keep the people in. He saw the confusion on my face. Your job here is not what you think it is, he continued. You are not a ranger in the traditional sense. You are a warden, a shepherd, a zookeeper. And the animals you are tending are us. He explained the protocol of the preserve. It was a strange, almost unbelievable story. The preserve was not a park. It was a sanctuary, a bubble of reality, a self-contained ecosystem, protected from a world that had changed. He was vague on the details. He spoke of the blight, a great silence, a change that had happened decades ago, outside the park's protected boundaries. The world you came from, the one with cities and cars and televisions, that world is a memory, he said, his face grim. It's a story we tell ourselves to stay sane. But it's not the real world anymore. The real world is what's out there. He gestured to the land beyond the fence, a land I couldn't see. And what's out there? I had asked. Alistair had just looked at me with his sad, tired eyes. That's the point, son. We don't know. All we know is that the ones who leave, they don't come back. Or if they do, they're not the same. They're copies. Empty shells that mimic the person they used to be. But the light inside is gone. And then he gave me the one, absolute, and unbreakable rule of the preserve. The foundation of our entire existence. You can do anything you want inside this fence, he said. You can climb the highest peak, you can swim in the deepest lake. You can live a full, happy, and meaningful life. But you can never, ever, for any reason, leave the park. This fence is the only thing keeping the blight out. This park is the last clean place on earth. To leave is to be lost. To leave is to be replaced. For 20 years I lived by that rule. I made a life in the preserve. It was a good life. We were a small, tight-knit community of about 50 souls, rangers, maintenance workers, a biologist, a doctor. We had our own gardens, our own small hydroelectric power plant. We were self-sufficient. We were safe. The park was our world. And it was a beautiful world. Towering mountains, crystal-clear rivers, vast forests teeming with life. The animals here were healthy, unafraid. They seemed to know on some deep, instinctual level that this place was a sanctuary for them, too. But there were always reminders of the rule. The fence. It was a constant presence, a shimmering 20-foot-high line that circumscribed our entire world. We patrolled it daily. We maintained the electrical generators that powered it. It was our shield, our wall against the unknown horror of the outside. And there were the echoes. Sometimes a tourist would appear at the gate. Not a real tourist. An echo. They would drive up in a car that looked decades out of date, wearing clothes from a bygone era. They would be smiling, their faces full of a placid, happy vacancy. They would ask for a map or directions to a visitor center that didn't exist. The protocol for dealing with echoes was simple and heartbreaking. We were to be polite. We were to tell them that the park was temporarily closed for a wildlife management program. We were to tell them to come back next season. And we were never ever to let them in. They would argue sometimes. They would get confused. They would insist they had a reservation. But eventually they would get back in their old, silent cars and drive away, back into the world they came from, a world that we knew was a lie. We were turning away ghosts, ghosts from a world that no longer existed, a world that was now itself the ghost. I saw dozens of echoes over my 20 years. They were a constant, sad reminder of the world we had lost, and the importance of the rule we had to keep. But after 20 years, the quiet, the safety, the routine, it began to feel like a cage. A beautiful, gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. The world outside the fence, the world I had left behind as a young man, began to call to me. I started to have dreams of cities, of crowds, of the smell of asphalt after a summer rain. I started to question the protocol. Was Alistair right? Was the world truly gone? Or was this all an elaborate lie? A social experiment? A prison designed to keep us here for some unknown reason? The doubt, once it took root, became a poison. My partner, a fellow ranger named Sarah, saw the change in me. She was born in the preserve. She had never known the outside world. To her, the protocol was as natural as the rising of the sun. The fence was not a prison wall. It was the boundary of her entire universe. "What's wrong, Sam?" she'd ask, seeing the distant, haunted look in my eyes. "You're thinking about the outside again, aren't you?" I need to know," I'd say. "I need to know for sure." "Know what?" she would ask, her face full of a genuine, loving confusion. "Know that we are safe? That we are alive? This is the only world that matters, Sam. The one inside the fence." But it wasn't enough for me anymore. The ghost of a memory of a world with more than 50 people in it was too strong. The catalyst for my decision, the thing that finally pushed me over the edge, was the radio. Part of my job was to maintain the old communications equipment, including a powerful shortwave radio that was, officially, for emergencies only. We were forbidden from trying to contact the outside. But one night, fueled by a bottle of homemade whiskey and a profound, soul-deep loneliness, I broke that rule. I spent hours turning the dial, listening to the static, to the endless, empty hiss of a dead world. And then I found it. A signal. It was faint, buried under layers of static, but it was there. It was music. A classical music station. A clear, beautiful, and impossible broadcast of a Vivaldi concerto. I listened for an hour, my heart pounding in my chest. It was real. There was still a world out there. A world with orchestras and radio stations and people who listened to Vivaldi. Alistair was wrong. The protocol was a lie. The prison was real. I didn't tell Sarah. I didn't tell anyone. I made my plan in secret. There was a maintenance gate at the far northern edge of the park, a place that was rarely patrolled. Its electronic lock was old, and I knew its weaknesses. I spent a week gathering a small pack. A compass, a map of the old world from before the blight, dried rations, a water filter. And one night, under the cover of a moonless sky, I did it. I walked for hours through the silent, sleeping forest. I reached the northern fence. I disabled the alarm. I picked the lock on the maintenance gate. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the cold steel gate. I looked back at the dark, familiar shapes of the mountains of the preserve, my home, my sanctuary, my prison for 20 years. And then I looked forward, into the unknown darkness of the outside world. With a final shuddering breath, I pushed the gate open, stepped through, and closed it behind me. I had broken the one rule that mattered. I had left the park. The air on the other side of the fence felt different. It wasn't a change in temperature or humidity. It was a change in substance. The air inside the preserve was alive, vibrant, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth and the constant, low-level hum of a million living things. The air out here was thin, sterile. It had the dead, still quality of a sealed room. And the silence. The silence was not the peaceful, watchful quiet of the park. It was a profound, absolute, and deeply unsettling emptiness. There were no crickets. No night birds. No distant cry of a coyote. The world outside the fence was utterly, completely silent. A new, cold fear, different from the claustrophobia I had felt inside, began to creep over me. But I pushed it down. This was it. This was freedom. I used my compass and my old map to orient myself. The nearest town, a small logging community called Pine Creek, was supposed to be about a 10-mile hike to the north. I started walking. The forest on this side of the fence was wrong. The trees were still there, but they looked sick. Their bark was a pale, anemic gray. Their needles were sparse. The ground was not a soft carpet of moss and fallen needles, but a dry, dusty floor of cracked earth. There were no animal tracks. No signs of life at all. It was a forest, but it was a dead forest. A perfect, silent, and sterile replica of a forest. I walked for hours, the only sound the crunch of my own boots on the dry, dead earth. The silence began to press in on me, to feel like a physical weight. My own footsteps sounded impossibly, obscenely loud. As dawn approached, I saw lights through the trees. A town. Pine Creek. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me weep washed over me. I had made it. I was back in the civilized world. I emerged from the dead forest and onto a paved road. The town of Pine Creek lay before me. It was exactly as I remembered it from the old maps. A single main street, a gas station, a diner, a small grocery store. But it was all wrong. The buildings were there, but they were perfect. Too perfect. The paint was not faded or chipped. The windows were spotlessly clean. There was no trash in the streets. No weeds in the cracks of the sidewalk. It looked like a movie set, a pristine, untouched replica of a small town. And it was utterly, completely silent. I walked down the middle of the main street. The doors were all closed. The windows were all dark. There were no cars on the street. There was no sign of life. I went to the diner first, the Pinecone Diner. The door was unlocked. I stepped inside. The interior was a perfect 1980s time capsule. Red vinyl booths, a Formica countertop, a jukebox in the corner. But it was all covered in a thick, uniform layer of fine, gray dust. A plate with a fossilized hamburger sat on the counter. A coffee cup was half full of a solid, black substance. The place had been abandoned, mid-meal, decades ago. But there was no decay. No rot. Just a perfect, silent, and dusty preservation. It was the same everywhere I looked. The gas station with its pumps frozen on a price from a forgotten decade. The grocery store, its shelves neatly stocked with cans and boxes whose labels had faded to pale ghosts. The entire town was a museum of a moment when the world had just stopped. I felt a new, more profound, and existential terror begin to bloom in my chest. Alistair hadn't been lying. The protocol wasn't a prison. It was an ark. And I had just willingly stepped off it and into a dead, silent world. I spent the day exploring the silent town, my hope turning to a cold, hard despair. I was alone. The only living thing in a world of ghosts. The Vivaldi I had heard on the radio, had it been a ghost signal? A lingering echo from a world that had died long ago? As dusk began to fall, I knew I had to go back. I had to get back to the preserve. To the safety of the fence. To Sarah. I started the long 10-mile hike back, my mind a turmoil of regret and fear. The dead forest was even more menacing in the twilight. The pale, sick-looking trees seemed to watch me, their silent forms like accusing fingers. It was full dark when I finally saw the shimmering, electrified line of the fence through the trees. I ran the last half-mile, my lungs burning, my only thought to get back inside, back to the world of the living. I reached the maintenance gate. It was closed just as I had left it. I fumbled for my lock-picking tools, my hands shaking. And then I heard a voice. "Sam? Is that you?" I froze. It was Sarah's voice. It was coming from the other side of the fence, from inside the preserve. I ran to the fence, and I saw her. She was standing about 20 feet inside the perimeter, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and relief. "Sarah!" I cried, my voice breaking. "Thank God. You have to open the gate. You have to let me back in." She took a step closer to the fence, but no further. "Sam, what did you do?" she whispered, her voice full of a terrible dawning horror. "Alistair, he came to my cabin. He told me you had left. He said no one has ever come back." "I'm right here, Sarah," I yelled, pressing my face against the cold chain link. "I came back. Just open the gate." "I can't," she sobbed. "Alistair said it's the protocol. The most important one. Once you leave, you can never be allowed back in. He said the blight changes you. That you wouldn't be you anymore." "That's insane," I screamed. "I'm me. I'm right here. Look at me." But as I said it, I looked down at my own hands illuminated in the faint security light of the fence. And I saw that the skin was wrong. It was pale, grayish, and a fine, dust-like substance was flaking off it. I looked up at Sarah. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She was not looking at me. She was looking at something just behind me. I turned around slowly. Standing on the dusty road of the dead town of Pine Creek was a figure. It was tall and thin, and it was wearing my clothes. My Green Ranger jacket. My hiking pants. My boots. And it had my face. It was a perfect, flawless copy of me. It smiled my smile. It looked at me with my own eyes. But the eyes were empty. Vacant. The light inside was gone. "You see, Sarah," the copy of me said, and its voice was my voice but flat, without emotion. "I told you I'd be back. Now be a dear and open the gate. I've had a very long day." Sarah stared, her mind unable to process the two versions of the man she loved. The copy of me turned its empty eyes on me, the original on the wrong side of the fence. And it spoke again. "Thank you," it said, "for opening the door." And then I understood the final, most terrible truth of the protocol. The fence wasn't there to keep the blight out. It was there to keep the originals in. The preserve wasn't an ark. It was a farm. A protected reserve of original, untainted human souls, kept safe and sound, waiting to be harvested. And the echoes that came to the gate, they weren't ghosts of the past. They were a test. A loyalty test for the wardens. To see if we would break the rules and let one of the empty ones in. But the real trap was not the echoes. It was the memory of the outside world itself. My doubt, my loneliness, my need to know it had all been a weakness that had been exploited. I had not escaped. I had been lured out. And in leaving, I had created a vacancy. I had left behind my life, my job, my face. And something from the silent, empty world had simply stepped into it. I had not been replaced. I had replaced myself. I stood there on the dead side of the fence, looking at the perfect empty copy of myself as it smiled my smile at the woman I loved. And in that moment I felt a despair so profound, so absolute, that it was almost peaceful. I had lost. The game was over. Sarah, on the other side of the fence, was staring at the two of us, her mind caught in an impossible paradox. "Sam," she whispered, her voice a fragile, broken thing. "Which one?" "It's me, honey," the copy said, its voice full of a calm, loving reassurance that I, in my panicked, terrified state, could never have mustered. That thing on the other side, that's just an echo. A trick of the blight. You know the rule. Never trust what you see on the outside. Let me in. Let's go home." It was a perfect, elegant, and inescapable trap. It was using the very rules of our sanctuary to condemn me. But Sarah, who had been born in the preserve, who understood its deep, strange logic better than I ever could, did something I did not expect. She did not open the gate. She looked at the copy. And then she looked at me. At my dusty, torn clothes. At my terrified, grief-stricken face. At the genuine, flawed, and messy pain in my eyes. And then she looked at the copy's eyes. And she saw the emptiness there. The perfect, placid, and soulless void. "No," she whispered. "You're not him. His eyes, they're not that quiet." The copy's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of something cold and ancient passed through its empty gaze. Annoyance. It turned its attention back to me. "You failed," it seemed to say without speaking. "You were supposed to be the key." And then it just turned around and walked away, back towards the silent, dead town of Pine Creek, its form slowly dissolving into the dusty twilight. It did not need to fight. It did not need to argue. It knew there would be other doors. Other lonely, doubting souls. I was left alone on the wrong side of the fence with the ghost of my own life. Sarah and I talked for hours through the cold, hard chain link of the fence. I told her everything. About the dead forest, the silent town, the copy of me. She cried. She believed me. But she could not let me in. The protocol was absolute. To open the gate would be to risk the entire preserve. To risk every soul inside. "You have to run, Sam," she said, her own voice full of a terrible, steely resolve. "You have to survive out there. As long as you are alive, that thing is just a copy. An imperfect echo. But if you die, if you are gone, then it becomes the original. It will have your life. It will have your memories. It will come back. And I won't be able to tell the difference." It was the cruelest fate I could imagine. I was condemned to live, to be a living ghost in a dead world, just to keep my own soulless reflection from taking my place. That was the last time I saw her. I walked away from the fence, back into the silent, empty world. I am writing this report now, years later. I do not know how it will reach you. Perhaps this old radio I found is a ghost signal of its own. Perhaps I am just another echo telling my story to the static. I have survived. I have learned to live in the quiet. I am a scavenger in a dead world. I move from one silent, dusty town to the next, always looking over my shoulder, always half expecting to see my own face, smiling back at me from a shop window. I do not know what the blight was. A plague? A war? A scientific experiment gone wrong? Or did the world just stop? Did the story just run out? I do not know. All I know is that the preserve is the last bastion of life on Earth. A small, fragile bubble of reality in a sea of silent, empty copies. And that my life, my lonely, pointless survival is the only thing that keeps its gatekeeper, my beloved Sarah, safe from the man who looks exactly like me. And I know that the most important protocol, the one that governs my every waking moment, is no longer, never leave the park. It is never die. Because the moment I do, my echo will finally, truly come home. Thank you for receiving this report from the Wilderness Protocol. The world is full of boundaries, seen and unseen. And sometimes the most important duty is to stand guard at a gate you can never again pass through. The greatest prison is not a place but a responsibility. If this protocol has been of value, please consider liking this video and subscribing for further transmissions. Be careful of the doors you open. You may not be the one who comes back through.